Welcome back to another edition of the Eleusinian Society. Today we got our final installment of the Freemasonry of the Ancient Egyptians by Manly P. Hall series. So if you haven't checked out any of the previous videos, make sure to check them out, because there's a lot of information that won't make sense in this video unless you go back and watch the other ones. So just check them out and stop back on this one. Just a real quick thing before we start. As some of you might have seen on our communities page, we had somebody custom make a cool 3D printed logo for us. So thanks to Nick for that. We highly appreciate it. And you can't really see because of the lights in here, but it does glow purple, which I think is kind of cool. And without further ado, the fourth and final installment of Freemasonry of the Ancient Egyptians by Manly P. Hall. The fifth degree of the Egyptian priests was the Balahate. This degree is slightly different from the previous ones because upon passing through the fourth degree, or the Kistophores, the candidate could summon the Demiurgos at will and demand that he wished to progress to the fifth degree. The Demiurgos could not refuse this request. The candidate was conducted into a hall where all brothers were present. He then was further conducted into a theater room where he seemed to be the only spectator in the crowd. All of the other higher positioned officers were in costume, and the show would soon begin. A high-status person called the Orus accompanied the torch-wielding Balahate on a quest down the halls of the temple to find something which was lost. When the group arrived at the entrance of the large cave, the Orus drew his sword, and flames began to illuminate the cavern walls. Deep inside of the cave was Typhon, the Grecian adaptation of Seth, the brother of Osiris who betrayed him and killed him. Typhon sat in a chair with the outward demeanor of a depressed teenager.
Tonight will be the night that I will fall for you.
When approached, however, Typhon leapt up and hundreds of heads came jetting out of his shoulders. Arms grew from his sides with great size, and scales began to replace his skin. The Orus advanced without fear or hesitation and decapitated the beast and threw his corpse into the dark abyss of the cave. There seems to be a theme of decapitation in these degrees. I don't know, I didn't write it. The wound from the head of the beast spewed flames as it continued to screech in agony. The candidate was then given a lecture as to the image that he just witnessed. Typhon represents fire, the duality of its symbolism, with fire bringing death and pain, but also warmth and nourishment. The Orus represented industry and labor, it being his duty to subdue the flames of evil and repurpose them for good. The Christophores was instructed in the science of chemistry and the art of decomposing substances and combining metals, a sort of early alchemy, like the Rosicrucians. He was now able to call upon the masters of these sciences to create his own experiments and research. The word of this degree was chimia, which translates to chemistry. The sixth degree, or the astronomers before the gate of the gods. This degree begins with the candidate being placed in shackles. The Thesmophores conducts them back to our favorite place, the Gate of Death. He descended 4 steps instead of the 3 from the last time he was there, because the room had been flooded with water and repurposed to represent the river Styx. Floating in the water were coffins which the candidate was told contained the bodies of previous members who had been put to death for betraying the oath of their order. Should he violate his obligations, he too would meet the same fate as those who remained inside the coffins. He was given a lecture into the origin of the Egyptian gods, the objects of people's adoration, how they conducted themselves, and how they came to exist. This section is incredibly interesting because it suggests that the common people were taught to worship polytheism as a way to divide them. But a single being was responsible for the entire creation of the universe, and only the most worthy would be able to learn of this knowledge. Because this sole being was responsible for everything in existence, and the universe was considered to be made perfect, it was believed by members of the society that humans could never fully understand their creator. The candidate of this degree began to study the most holy science of astronomy. His duty was to observe the night sky and interpret the movements of celestial bodies. He was told to stay away from the deceiving words of the astrologers or drawers of horoscopes, as it was considered to be clandestine in nature and superstitious. The astrologers chose the word phoenix as a word for their order. So, out of mockery, the astronomers of the Gate of the Gods used this as a kind of second-tier word for their order. After their instruction, the initiate was brought back into the Gate of the Gods to be introduced into the Pantheon, where all the gods in heaven were present in the form of elaborate paintings. From this point forward, the candidate was not withheld from any information by the Demiurgos, and was even given a list of all of the chief inspectors in the world, and therefore access to all of the global members. The last part of the ceremony included the newly made astronomer learning the priestly dance, which corresponded with the movements of celestial bodies. The word of this degree was ibis, signifying both the image of Thoth, later known as Hermes Trismegistus, and the symbol of vigilance. The seventh and final degree of the Crata Repoa, the prophet, or Sathpanath Panka. The last degree, the most important and eminent, which gave the most detailed and complete explanation of the mysteries. The astronomer could not obtain this degree without the approval of the king, the demiurgos, and all members of the order. 100% approval was needed. If the candidate could so accomplish the amazing feat of getting so many people to agree on one thing, he was given a sort of public procession, which was called a pamilak, also called the circumcision of the tongue. The tongue wasn't actually circumcised, it was more of a symbolic way to say that the sheath around their tongue had been lifted, had been cut off, so they were finally able to speak all of the truths openly without being held down by people of higher status.
I can do whatever the f*** I want!
When the parade was finished and night came, the members went quietly into the city, into a square house with several rooms adorned with pictures representing human life. These houses were called Maneras, or residents of the Manes. Manes was the word in ancient Greece and Rome which was given to the souls of dead ancestors. It was believed by some that the initiates of the mysteries could speak and interact with the dead. The house also had a numerous amount of columns, coffins, and a statue of the Sphinx. The new prophet was given a ceremonial beverage upon their arrival called an oimelas, or a sort of Egyptian honey wine, kind of like mead. He was invested with an amulet bearing the image of a cross, an item that symbolism was only known by the initiates and still to this day cannot be found. They were obliged to wear it continuously and to rarely take it off. The prophet was gifted a white robe called an itangi. His head was shaved and made into the form of a square. The sign of this degree was made by crossing his hands into the sleeves of his robe, which were very wide.
I like it.
Wide sleeves.
The word of this degree is Adon, the Latin root for Adonis and Adonai. Just like how in Jewish meal prayer we say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai means Lord. After receiving these tools of the prophet degree, he received a key, which gave him access into the sacred library where he could read from any of the Ammonitish language books which were previously closed off to him as he was not of a higher status. Perhaps the most important of all the newly accessed privileges of the prophet was that he had the ability to vote in electing new kings, and that he could eventually join the Demiurgos and bring in future initiates. I'd like to thank you for joining us on another edition of the Eleusinian Society. This concludes our series on Egyptian Freemasonry as told by Manly P. Hall on the Crata Repoa. Hopefully there were some things that you might have learned or found interesting. And if you have any other ideas for future topics that we can talk about on the show, just comment down below and we'll be happy to see what we can do as to make a video on that. And just a reminder that as the weather gets more beautiful outside and more warm, go out there, spend some time in nature, reconnect a little bit, and just take a nice deep breath of fresh air. Thank you.